Karna, and its force was destroyed. Janardana continued to speak of the other enemies they had vanquished. He told of the Nishada's son Akalavya, who was so proud and skilled in battle that he could have fought against the gods themselves. But I slew him by an act of guilt, Janardana said, and deprived him of his thumb. Arjuna listened with awe as Janardana recounted their victories over the other Rakshasas, Hidima, Veka, and Kurmir, who were all destroyers of Brahmanas and sacrifices. He spoke of Alayudha, a demon possessed of large powers of illusion, who was slain by Hidimba Samas. Janardana finished speaking. Arjuna felt a sense of reassurance wash over him. "You have always been there to guide me," he said, "and for that I am eternally grateful." Janardana smiled and nodded, his eyes shining with a deep understanding. "I will continue to be here for you, O Dhananjaya, guiding you on the path of righteousness." Just then the sound of drums and trumpets echoed across the battlefield, signaling the approach of the Kauravas' army. Janardana's expression turned serious as he looked out at the chaos unfolding before them. "The uproar made by the hostile army is increasing," he said. "Your troops are flying away on all sides, and Drona, that foremost of all smitters, is scorching us in battle here." The sun was setting over the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the armies of the Kauravas, and the Pandavas. Dhritarashtra, the blind king, sat in his chariot, surrounded by his advisors, including Sanjaya. They were discussing the events of the day's battle, and the king's son, Duryodhana, was growing increasingly frustrated. "Why did not Karna use that deadly dart to slay Arjuna?" Dhritarashtra asked, his voice laced with disappointment. "Why did he not take advantage of the opportunity to destroy our greatest enemy?" Sanjaya, who had been present at the battle, shook his head in sorrow. "It was not just Karna's fault, O king," he said. "We all knew that if Arjuna were killed, the Pandavas would be defeated. But we also knew that Karna was under the influence of Krisha, and that as long as he had the protection of the divine prince, he would never be able to vanquish Arjuna." Dhritarashtra's face twisted in anger. "My son is fond of quarrel," he said. "His advisors are foolish. He is vain of his wisdom." But Sanjaya continued, his voice calm and measured. "We did discuss this among ourselves, O king," he said. "We knew that if Karna could slay Arjuna, we would be victorious, and so we urged him to do it again and again. But Krisha was always there protecting Arjuna, and Karna never seemed able to overcome his foe." King's face grew darker with every word. "Why did not you remind Karna of this?" he asked Sanjaya. "Why did you not urge him to use the dart?" Sanjaya bowed his head in shame. "We did try, O king," he said, "but Krisha was always one step ahead of us. He protected Arjuna with all his might, and Karna never seemed able to defeat him." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in a dark shadow, Dhritarashtra's anger gave way to despair. He knew that his son had been foolish, and that his advisors had failed him. But then, as if by chance, Sanjaya spoke again. "I remember now," he said. "Krisha did reveal to me the truth of what happened. It was a plan, O king, to ensure the victory of the Pandavas." Dhritarashtra's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" he asked. Sanjaya smiled. "Krishna knew that if Karna were to slay Arjuna, it would be a great blow to the Pandavas. But Krishna also knew that if Ghatotkacha, the son of Hidimba, were to slay, in the midst of the great war between the Pandavas and the Kauravas." Dhritarashtra, the king of the Kauravas, addressed his charioteer Sanjaya with a sense of dismay and regret. He had just learned about the events that unfolded after the death of Ghatotkacha, the son of Hidimba, who was killed by Karna's powerful dart. "Why did you not use this divine dart to slay either Arjuna or Krisha?" Dhritarashtra asked Sanjaya, his voice filled with a mix of anger and disappointment. "You all knew that its power was unmatched, that it could pierce even the gods themselves. Why did Karna, with that dart in hand, fail to strike down our enemy?" Sanjaya replied, "O king, we had indeed discussed this very plan among ourselves. We would return from battle each day and debate about using the dart against either Arjuna or Krishna, but fate seemed to have other plans. Destiny, it seems, was at work here." Dhritarashtra's expression turned grave as he continued his inquiry. "Tell me, Sanjaya, what happened after Ghatotkacha's death? How did our warriors fare against the Pandavas in that nocturnal battle?" Sanjaya began to recount the events of the previous night. As the darkness fell, Karna's troops had launched a fierce attack on the Pandava forces, slaying many of them. Yudhishthira, overcome with grief and despair, sat down on his chariot, his face wet with tears. Krisha, however, stepped forward to console his friend, "O king, do not let your sorrow consume You, he said, you are a warrior, a leader of men. Rise up and fight. If you yield to grief, our victory will be uncertain. Yudhishthira wiped away his tears and replied, Krishna, I know the path of duty, but the death of Ghatotkacha weighs heavily on me. He was a noble soul who had served us in the forest when we were living there. His services to us will never be forgotten. Yudhishthira spoke. His eyes scanned the battlefield. The Kauravas, led by Drona and Karna, were pressing forward with great ferocity. Bhimesna's son was fighting valiantly, but the Pandava forces seemed on the brink of collapse. Yudhishthira's face hardened as he made a decision. Krishna, I will not yield to despair. I will fight on, and I will slay Karna. If it is the last thing I do with that result. He set off towards Karna, his formidable bow at the ready. As Yudhishthira approached, Sanjaya described the scene unfolding before. The war between the Pandavas and Kauravas raged on for 9 hours, with neither side giving in. The king, Yudhishthira, son of Pandu, had restrained himself from slaying Karna, but when Ghatotkacha was killed by Karna, that night he became filled with grief and anger as the battle continued. Bhima's vast host was held back by Drona, a great warrior. Yudhishthira ordered his men to attack Drona, but they were all worn out from the previous battles. The king himself addressed Drishtadyumna, saying, Resist. The pot-born you had sprung from fire to destroy, Drona, cheerfully rush into battle. You need not further. Pandava's army rushed towards Drona, but he received them with great force and perseverance. King Duryodhana, who wanted to protect Drona's life, also joined the fight. The battle between the Kauravas and Pandavas was intense, with both sides tired and exhausted. As night fell, the warriors were unable to continue fighting due to their weariness and sleep. Vivatsu Arjuna suggested that they rest for a while, saying, All of you with your animals are worn out with exertion and blind with sleep. Ye warriors, ye are enveloped in darkness and dust. Hearing these words, the Kuru army agreed to stop fighting. The Pandava army also ceased their attack, and both sides laid down their arms. The troops of both armies, exhausted from the long battle, fell asleep on the battlefield. Some lay on horseback, some on elephant backs, while others rested on the ground. As the moon rose in the sky, it illuminated the dark battlefield. The warriors, still half asleep, looked like a beautiful picture drawn by skilled artists. They were adorned with earrings and youth, but their limbs were mangled from the previous battles. The moon's rays spread across the quarters, dispelling the darkness that had hidden everything. As the world became illuminated, some creatures continued to roam about, while others abstained. The Kuru army, awakened by the moon's light, slowly came back to life. As the night gave way to dawn, the warriors stirred from their slumber. They looked around at the peaceful scene before them, and for a moment they forgot about the war that had raged on for so long. The sun was setting over the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the assembled warriors. Duryodhana, his face twisted in anger and resentment, strode towards his teacher Drona. His eyes blazed with a fierce determination as he began to speak. No mercy should have been shown to our foes. While they were heartless and worn out, he spat at Drona's feet. We showed them kindness by letting them alone, but now they are stronger than ever. We, on the other hand, are losing energy and strength with each passing day. Duryodhana's words dripped with venom as he accused Drona of being too soft on their enemies. He claimed that the Pandavas were growing stronger, while their own forces were weakening. You are acquainted with all weapons. He sneered at Drona, capable of destroying the 3 worlds with a mere thought. Drona's expression remained calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he listened to Duryodhana's tirade. He knew that his student was driven by anger and frustration, but he also saw the fear lurking beneath the surface. Although I am old, Drona said, finally, I still exert myself in battle to the utmost extent of my might. His voice was steady and firm as he addressed Duryodhana. All these men are unacquainted with weapons, but I am well versed in them. If I were to slay them, it would be no ignoble act. Drona's words seemed to fan the flames of Duryodhana's anger, and he launched into a new tirade against Arjuna. The son of Kunti, you think that Arjuna is worn out in battle. He sneered at Drona, but I tell you truly, no one can withstand him when his wrath is excited. Duryodhana's words dripped with contempt as he boasted about his own prowess and that of his allies. He claimed that they would defeat the Pandavas easily, and that Karna, his maternal uncle, was the key to their victory. But Drona remained unmoved by Duryodhana's boasts. Instead, he laughed and said, Who is there that would return home in safety, having encountered Arjuna in battle? You are sinful and cruel, Duryodhana, and you cause all these innocent Kshatriyas to be slain with the final flourish. Drona sent Duryodhana off to face Arjuna in battle. Go, though against the son of Kunti, he said, his voice firm but calm. You are a well-born Kshatriya, and you seek battle. Why not go yourself and vanquish the Pandavas? The words hung in the air as Duryodhana turned to face his teacher, his eyes blazing with determination. The sun was rising over the battlefield, casting a reddish hue across the sky. The air was electric with anticipation as both sides prepared for another day of battle. Sanjaya, the narrator, described the scene unfolding before him as the night wore on, and 3/4 of it had passed. The battle between the Kuras and Pandavas resumed. Both armies were filled with joy and enthusiasm, eager to clash again. The sky was painted with hues of copper as a runner. The charioteer of Surya slowly weakened. The moon's light. The warriors from both sides stood at attention, their hands clasped in reverence. As they faced the rising sun, they chanted prayers for the dawn, their voices carrying across the battlefield like a gentle breeze. The air was filled with an otherworldly energy, and the very fabric of reality seemed to vibrate with tension. Drona, the great warrior and teacher, led one division of the Kuru army against the Pandavas, and Panchalas Madhava, also known as Krishna, advised Arjuna on how to counter Drona's attack. Keep your foes to your left, he counseled, and place this division to your right. Arjuna obeyed, positioning himself for battles. The fight began. Bhimasna addressed Arjuna with words of encouragement. The time has come to fulfill our duty as Kshatriyas, he said. We must strive for victory and honor. Put forth your prowess and pay the debt you owe to truth, prosperity, virtue, and fame. Arjuna nodded, his determination burning brighter than ever. With renewed resolve, Arjuna charged forward, his chariot racing across the battlefield like a tempest. Drona's warriors tried to withstand him, but he was unstoppable, cutting through their ranks with ease. His arrows flew swift and true, striking their marks with deadly precision. The battle raged on with neither side giving quarter. The air grew thick with dust, making it hard for anyone to see or breathe. Drona himself stood tall, his presence commanding respect from all who saw him. He wielded his bow like a god, sending arrow after arrow into the frayas. The fight continued. Drupada and Virata joined forces against Drona, but he proved too powerful. With swift strokes of his bow he cut down their warriors one by one, leaving them to fall on the battlefield. The Panchalas, though valiant in battle, could not withstand Drona's might. In a final act of defiance, Drupada hurled an iron dart at Drona's chariot, but it was no match for the warrior's skill. With 2 swift arrows he shattered the dart and sent Drupada tumbling to the ground. Virata followed suit, but his fate was sealed as well. The sun had just risen over the battle-scared field, casting a golden glow over the chaos. The warriors, clad in their shining armor, stood ready to face each other once more. Sanjaya, the narrator, watched as the armies clashed, their cries and roars echoing through the air like thunderous. The day wore on. The noise grew louder, a deafening cacophony of conch shells, drums, and trumpets. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the elephants, their trunks entwined with the horses' manes. As they charged forward, the foot soldiers clashed with the car warriors, their swords flashing in the sunlight like 1,000 tiny suns. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and dust. Sanjaya described it as if a river had flowed through the battlefield, its waters red with the lifeblood of elephants, horses, and men. The cries of the wounded and dying filled the air, mingling with the sound of clashing steel on steeless. The battle raged on. The warriors began to tire. Their armor was dented, their swords heavy with blood. Elephants and steeds stumbled and fell, their riders struggling to stay in the saddle. Sanjaya noted that even the mighty Drona and Arjuna seemed shaken, but they remained steadfast, a beacon of hope for their comrades. The dust swirled around them, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The warriors fought on, guided by instinct rather than sight. Sanjaya described it as if night had fallen once more, shrouding the battlefield in an impenetrable veil. In this chaos, Duryodhana and Karna clashed with the twins. Nakula and Sahadeva, Radha's son, Sasharma, faced off against Bhima, while Arjuna battled Drona's son Ashvathama. The outcome was far from certain, as each warrior sought to vanquish his opponent. The encounter between Duryodhana and Nakula was particularly fierce. Nakula shot hundreds of arrows at the Kaurava prince, But Duryodhana countered with a barrage of shafts that set Nakula stumbling back. The troops cheered Duryodhana's victory. But Nakula refused to yield, his words cutting deep into Duryodhana's heart. Wait, recollecting all your was caused by my evil counsels. The sun beat down on the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the chaos that unfolded before it. Dussasana, fueled by rage, charged forward in his chariot, its wheels pounding the earth with a deafening roar. His target was Sahadeva, who stood firm against the onslaught, his broad-headed arrow at the readiest. Dussasana's chariot bore down on him. Sahadeva swiftly drew back his bowstring and released a single deadly shot. The arrow flew straight, then true, striking its mark with precision. The driver of Dussasana's chariot fell to the ground, his head severed from his body by the swift and merciless blood rains. Now unattended, were swept away by the wind, sending the chariot careening wildly across the battlefield. Dussasana himself was thrown forward, his face contorted with shock and fury. Sahadeva, however, remained calm, his eyes fixed intently on the chaos unfolding before him. With a swift motion, he laid aside his bow and grasped for the reins, expertly halting the chariot's wild flight as the driverless vehicle came to a stop. Sahadeva seized his bow once more, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Meanwhile, Karna emerged onto the scene, drawn by the commotion, his eyes locked onto Bhima, who stood tall and unwavering amidst the mayhem. The two warriors clashed in a flurry of steel and fury, their battle raging like a tempest across the battlefield. Bhima's mass rose high into the air, crashing down upon Karna's chariot with a resounding blow. The vehicle shuddered, its wooden frame splintering beneath the force of the impact. Karna himself stumbled back, his face twisted in pain and rage. Undeterred, he seized a new bow and launched a hail of arrows at Bhima, who stood firm against the onslaught. Their battle raged on, each warrior trading blows with unyielding ferocity. The earth trembled beneath their feet as they clashed, their roars echoing across the battlefield like thunders. The fight between Karna and Bhima reached its crescendo. Drona and Arjuna engaged in a duel of their own, their chariots dancing across the field with deadly precision. Their battle was a spectacle to behold, each warrior displaying feats of skill and bravery that left onlookers agog. Their chariots whirled around one another, their drivers guiding them with practiced ease. The air was filled with the sound of clashing steel, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by the sheer force of their combatants. The battle raged on, a strange and wondrous phenomenon unfolded above the fray. Celestial beings, gods, Gandharvas, Rishis, and Siddhas descended upon the battlefield, drawn by the spectacle unfolding below. The sun beat down upon the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the carnage unfolding before Sanjaya's eyes as he watched. Dussasana, Duryodhana's son, clashed with Drishtadyumna, the Panchala prince. The two warriors exchanged blows, their chariots crashing into each other as they showed arrows at one another. Drishtadyumna's golden car was soon covered in shafts, and Dussasana's chariot became invisible beneath the onslaught. But Duryodhana's son refused to yield, forcing Drishtadyumna to retreat. The Panchala prince turned his attention towards Drona, but Nakula and Sahadeva, the twin brothers of the Pandavas, followed close behind him. As they approached Drona, a fierce battle erupted between the 4 warriors of Duryodhana's army and the 3 Pandava brothers. The clash was intense, with each side determined to emerge victorious. Sanjaya watched in awe as the warriors fought with honor and valor, their movements swift and deadly. But amidst the chaos, an unexpected moment of tenderness arose as Satyaki, the son of Sinai, approached Duryodhana. The 2 old friends gazed at each other with a mix of nostalgia and regret. They recalled their childhood days when they had played together as brothers, and the memories brought tears to their eyes. Duryodhana's words were laced with sorrow and longing. Fie on wrath of friend, and fie on vindictiveness, fie on Kshatriya usage, and fie on might and prowess. Since thou aimest thy weapons at me, and I too am aiming at thee, O bull of Sinai's race. But Satyaki was unmoved, his heart hardened by the dictates of duty. He replied, This is no assembly, O prince, nor the abode of our preceptor, where in former days we sported together. The battle raged on, with both sides exchanging blows and neither gaining the upper hand. Duryodhana's arrows rained down upon Satyaki, but the warrior's reflexes were quick, and he countered each shot with a precision that left Duryodhana awestruck as the fight intensified. Karna, the son of Adhirath, joined the fray, determined to rescue his friend. But Bhima, the mighty son of Pandu, was not one to back down from a challenge. The 2 warriors clashed their bows and arrows, singing as they exchanged blows of battle. became a maelstrom of chaos with shafts flying through the air like a swarm of locusts. Sanjaya watched in awe as the warriors fought on their movements, swift and deadly. In the end it seemed that neither side would emerge victorious for both Duryodhana. The sun beat down on the battlefield, casting a golden glow over the chaos that ensued. The Panchalas and Srinjaya's mighty carved warriors of the Pandava army clashed with Drona. Their illustrious foe Sanjaya watched in awe as Drona unleashed his wrath upon them, his weapons slissing through the enemy ranks like a set cutting through grain. The carnage was immense, with steeds and human beings falling left and right. The Panchalas and Srinjaya fought valiantly, but they were no match for Drona's mastery of the Brahmastra. As the battle raged on, fear began to creep into the hearts of the Pandavas. They knew that if Drona continued to fight with such ferocity, their army would be annihilated. Krishna, ever vigilant and concerned for his friend's well-being, approached Arjuna and whispered words of caution in his ear. Drona is a formidable foe, unmatched by any mortal, he said, but there is one weakness to exploit. When he lays aside his weapons, even the gods can slay him. Arjuna's face remained resolute, but Krishna's words struck a chord within him. He knew that Drona was indeed invincible in battle, and that their only hope lay in finding a way to subdue him without resorting to force. The two princes conferred with Yudhishthira, who ultimately agreed to adopt the contrivance suggested by Krishna. Ever eager for battle, took matters into his own hands. He slew an enormous elephant belonging to Indravarman, the chief of the Malavas, and approached Drona, shouting, "A Swadaman has been slain. Cease your fighting, O Brahmana." The words were a ruse, but they had the desired effect on Drona. The old warrior's eyes clouded over, his mind reeling with grief. He firmly believed that Yudhishthira would never speak an untruth, and so he asked the prince directly if his son was indeed slain. But as the moments ticked by, Drona began to realize that Brahmana's words were false. Meanwhile, Krishna watched anxiously from afar, aware of the danger that Drona posed to their army. He knew that if the old warrior continued to fight with such ferocity, they would all be doomed. So he turned to Yudhishthira and urged him to tell an untruth, just this once, for the sake of saving their lives. Yudhishthira hesitated, torn between his commitment to truth and the desperate need to save his army. But Krishna's words struck a chord within him, and he ultimately agreed to adopt the ruse. As Demisna continued to shout lies about a Swathaman, the sun beat down upon the battlefield as the clash between Drona, the renowned preceptor of the Kauravas, and Drishtadyumna, the brave son of Drupada, reached its peak. Sanjaya watched in awe as Drishtadyumna, fueled by his desire to slay Drona, took up a formidable bow that resembled the roll of thunder. Its tone was like the rumble of clouds, and its string was strong enough to pierce through even the most resilient armor. As Drishtadyumna drew back the bowstring, an arrow resembling a fiery serpent with the splendor of flames shot forth from it. The troops beheld a blazing bow bent with force by Trishata's son, and they knew that this was the last hour of their world. Seeing that arrow aimed at him, Drona thought that his final moment had arrived. The preceptor prepared to deflect the shaft, but his own celestial weapons refused to obey him. His arrows, which had been shot ceaselessly for 4 days and 1 night, were now exhausted. As he gazed upon the empty quiver, grief and despair washed over him like a stormy sea. In that moment of anguish, Drona desired to lay aside his arms as requested by the wise Rishishora, taking up another celestial bow given by Indra. As Drona continued to fight with Drishtadyumna, he showed the Panchala prince with a thick barrage of arrows, filling him with rage and mauling his antagonist with his own keen shafts. Drona severed Drishtadyumna's bow and standard in 100 fragments. Undeterred, Drishtadyumna took up another bow, and with a piercing arrow struck Drona in the center of his chest. The mighty preceptor was deeply pierced and lost his composure in that encounter. He then countered by shooting sharp arrows that cut off Drishtadyumna's remaining bows. As the battle raged on, both warriors displayed incredible agility, their movements resembling the aerial acrobatics of a hawk swooping down for prey. Drona shot darts at the white steeds of his antagonist one after another, but spared the red ones that belonged to himself. The Panchala prince steeds fell lifeless on the ground. Drishtadyumna, though deprived of his car and bow, grasped a mass in desperation. But Drona, with a flurry of arrows, cut off the mass even as it was about to strike him. Seizing a sword and shield, Drishtadyumna sprang towards Drona like Garuda swooping down on a serpent. The Panchala prince performed diverse evolutions in battle, wheeling around, whirling his sword. In the midst of the great battle, Duryodhana and his companions, fueled by rage, surrounded Satyaki on all sides. Kripa and Karna, 2 skilled warriors approached the grandson of Sinai with swift arrows intent on striking him down. But King Yudhishthira, along with Bhima and Arjuna, quickly rallied to protect their only surrounding Satyaki with a phalanx of mighty car warriors. The battle raged on with both sides exchanging blows and neither gaining the upper hand. The earth was scorched by the relentless barrage of arrows, and the air was filled with the cries of the wounded and the dying. Human arms and heads lay strewn about, umbrellas displaced from chariots, and ye-tails scattered across the battlefield. As the carnage continued, King Yudhishthira rallied his troops once more, urging them to put forth their full vigor against Drona. The pot-born prince, the mighty car warrior, son of Bharadwaja, was locked in a fierce duel with Bhima's son Drishtadyumna. The earth trembled beneath their feet as they clashed, and meteors fell from the sky, foretelling great terrors. Drona, his energy wavering, beheld Prisheta's son before him once more, and recalling the words of the rishis about his impending departure for heaven, he became despondent. Yet he still had a desire to give up his life in battle. Fairly encompassed by Drupada's troops, Drona began to wreak havoc on the Kshatriya warriors, slaying thousands with each passing moment. Bhima, witnessing the illustrious prince of the Panchalas without arms or armor, approached him cautiously. That Grinder of foes took up Drishtadyumna on his own chariot and urged him to save himself, saying that no other warrior could match the preceptor's prowess in battle. Thus addressed, Drishtadyumna quickly grasped a strong new bow and began to shoot arrows at Drona. With unyielding ferocity, 2 warriors invoked their celestial weapons, each trying to outdo the other. Drishtadyumna covered Drona with a multitude of mighty arms, but the preceptor still managed to destroy them all. However, in his zeal to slay Drona, he began to cut down the warriors who protected him. The Vesatas, Sivasvalikas, and Kurusas, Drishtadyumna's arrows rained down on him. Drona's strength waned, but still he managed to pierce the prince with many arrows. In his final moments, Bhima spoke words of wisdom to the preceptor, urging him to consider the virtue of non-violence. As the sun beat down on the battlefield, the Kurus were in disarray. Their leader, Drona, had fallen, and with him their courage seemed to have vanished. The warriors, once proud and fierce, now trembled with fear, their eyes filled with tears as they beheld their enemies, the Pandavas, gaining the upper hand. The Kaurava army, once a formidable force, was now in full retreat. Their leaders, including Duryodhana, fled in terror, abandoning their vehicles and armor as they desperately sought to escape the clutches of their foes. The sound of wailing echoed through the air as the Kurus, once united and strong, were now broken and scattered. Aswathaman, Drona's son, was one of the few who remained steadfast in the face of defeat. With a fierce battle cry, he charged into the fray, determined to avenge his father's death. His enemies, including Sikandin and the proud Drakus, fought valiantly against him, but Aswathaman's bravery and skill were unmatched. As the Kaurava army continued to flee in disarray, Duryodhana, their king, was overcome with grief. He had lost his mentor and leader, and his people were scattered and demoralized. His son Aswathaman approached him, urging him to rally their troops and fight on. But Duryodhana was unable to muster the strength to do so. Kripa, a wise and experienced warrior, attempted to explain to Aswathaman what had transpired on the battlefield. He told of how Drona had invoked the Brahma weapon, the celestial force that had decimated their enemies and left them reeling in fear. But even Kripa's words were laced with sorrow and regret, for he knew that their defeat was all but certain. As the battle raged on, Arjuna, the Pandava warrior, refused to heed the advice of his friends and allies. He believed that Drona would not fight after Aswathaman had fallen, and so he urged his comrades to press their advantage and take advantage of the Kaurava's weakness. But even as Arjuna's words seemed prophetic, a glimmer of hope remained for the Kauravas, for in the midst of defeat there was still a chance for redemption, a chance for them to rise again and fight on against overwhelming odds. The fate of the Kurus hung precariously in the balance as the battle raged on with no end in sight. The sun was setting over the kingdom, casting a golden glow over the assembly hall where Dhritarashtra sat in deep contemplation. His eyes were fixed on Sanjaya, his trusted advisor, who stood before him with a sullen expression. Dhritarashtra's voice trembled as he asked, "Sanjaya, what did Aswathaman say when he heard of the slaughter of his aged father?" Drona, the king's words hung in the air like a challenge to the gods themselves. Sanjaya hesitated before responding, knowing that the tale was one of great sorrow and tragedy. As the story unfolded, Dhritarashtra's eyes widened with pride as he recounted Aswathaman's remarkable lineage. Drona, the greatest of preceptors, had imparted the sacred knowledge of celestial weapons to his son Aswathaman. The king began this was no ordinary gift for Drona, and learned from none other than Rama himself. The great king of Ayodhya, Sanjaya, listened intently. Dhritarashtra continued. Drona's sense of arms was not just a collection of techniques. It was a way of life, and Aswathaman, having absorbed every detail, had become a second Drona in his own right. The king's voice swelled with admiration as he described Aswathaman's many virtues, his mastery of the celestial weapons, his prowess in battle, and his unwavering dedication to duty. But then, like a shadow falling across the sun, Dhritarashtra's tone turned somber. And now, Sanjaya, I ask you, what did Aswathaman say when he heard that Drona had been slain by Drishtadyumna, the prince of the Panchalas? The question hung in the air like a challenge to fate itself. As Sanjaya paused before responding, Dhritarashtra's eyes seemed to bore into his very soul, and then with a heavy heart he spoke the words that would seal Aswathaman's fate. Aswathaman has been ordained to be the slayer of Drishtadyumna, just as Yajnisno's son was destined to kill Drona. The king's words were like a prophecy foretelling a future filled with blood and sorrow. In the silence that followed, Sanjaya seemed to disappear into himself, lost in thought, and Dhritarashtra, his eyes still fixed on the advisor, knew that their conversation had only just begun. For the fate of Aswathaman and the kingdom itself hung precariously in the balance. The sun had barely risen over the vast expanse of the Kaurava army, but already the air was electric with tension. Sanjaya stood by, a witness to the unfolding drama, as Drona's son Aswatthama, his eyes blazing with fury, addressed Duryodhana. Today I have learned the truth about my father's death, he declared, his voice trembling with rage. Those low wretches Drishtadyumna and Yudhishthira have perpetrated a sinful act, disguising themselves as virtuous men to slay my father. While he lay on his arms, Aswatthama's body seemed to blaze forth like the destroyer himself, consumed by an inner fire that threatened to engulf him. As he spoke, he repeatedly wiped away tears from his eyes, his hot breaths escaping in ragged sighs. I have no choice but to avenge my father's death, he drawled, his words dripping with malice. Those who perpetrate such acts must be punished, and I will not rest until the Panchalas are exterminated. Duryodhana listened intently, his eyes gleaming with excitement as Aswatthama continued to speak. My father, Drona, was a just man, a warrior of great renown, he said, his voice cracking with emotion, and yet he suffered the indignity of having his locks seized in the sight of all our troops. I will not rest until I have avenged that humiliation. As Aswatthama's words hung in the air, the Kaurava army erupted into a frenzy of sound, and furicants were blown, drums beaten, and dindamas sounded out, creating a cacophony that shook the earth itself. The Pandavas, meanwhile, gathered in council, their faces set with determination as they prepared to face the coming battle. And Aswatthama, his heart ablaze with rage, invoked the celestial weapon known as Narayana. This mighty force granted to him by Lord Narayana himself was said to be capable of slaying even the unslayable. With a fierce cry, Aswatthama touched water and called forth the power of Narayana. As the Kaurava army charged forward, their war cries echoing through the air. The battle that would decide the fate of the world began in earnest. The stage was set for a clash of titans, with Aswatthama at its forefront, wielding the mighty Narayana weapon against his enemies. The battle-scared earth trembled beneath the feet of the warriors as the sound of thunderous drums echoed through the skies. The once clear blue heavens now churned with dark clouds, releasing torrents of rain. And upon the land the winds howled like a chorus of restless spirits, whipping up the seas into a frenzy and causing the rivers to flow in reverses. The Kauravas rallied behind Drona's son Aswatthama. Their army seemed invincible. Their cants blared out a defiant challenge, as if daring anyone to stand against them. But amidst this turbulent chaos, Sanjaya stood by Dhritarashtra's side, recounting the tale of the war. Tell me, O Sanjaya, Dhritarashtra implored, what counsel did the Pandavas adopt when they saw our army falter? How could we have been so easily routed? Sanjaya's words painted a vivid picture. When Drona fell to the ground, his lifeless body like a fallen tree, our warriors fled in terror. Some abandoned their chariots, others were trampled by their own steeds, while others were dragged away by elephants, their bodies mangled and broken. Dhritarashtra's eyes widened in dismay as he listened to Sanjaya's account. Who is this Aswatthama? He asked, his voice laced with a mix of awe and trepidation. How can one man rally our shattered forces? Arjuna stepped forward, his voice steady and calm. He is the son of Drona. Arjuna explained the very preceptor who had given away 1,000 cows to Brahmins upon his birth as Swathaman was born with a mighty roar, like Indra's own steed, and he has been destined for greatness from that moment on as Sanjaya continued his tale. The darkness deepened, and the sounds of war grew louder. The drums beat out a furious rhythm as if summoning the very gods themselves to join in the fray. Dhritarashtra's face contorted with anguish as he listened to Arjuna's words. You lied to your preceptor. Arjuna accused him, his voice heavy with sorrow. You told Drona that Aswathaman was dead, and so he laid down his arms only to be slaughtered like a helpless animal. The king's eyes fell weighed down by the crushing weight of his own guilt. He knew that Arjuna spoke the truth, that he had indeed lied to Drona, using his words as a pretext for the slaughter of his preceptors. The battle raged on the earth, shook beneath their feet, and the skies grew darker still. The very fabric of morality seemed torn apart, leaving only chaos and destruction in its wake in this maelstrom of war won. The mighty warriors stood in silence as Sanjaya recounted the words of Arjuna to the assembly, but Bhima, his voice filled with indignation, spoke out against his brother's words. What is this, Bhima? Exclaimed. You speak like a wise anchorite or a Brahmana who has mastered his senses. A Kshatriya's duty is not just to preach morality, but to protect himself and others from harm. You have the prowess of Sekar himself, yet you hesitate to take action against our enemies. Bhima's words cut deep into Arjuna's heart, like a sharp arrow piercing its target. Remember how we were dragged into exile, forced to live in the woods. For 13 years our kingdom was stolen from us, and Drapada was insulted in public. You have forgiven all these wrongs, but now you seem indifferent to our plight. Bhima's voice rose in anger, his words like a tempest raging across the land. I came here with you to avenge ourselves against those who wronged us, but now I see that you are more concerned with virtue than with justice. You speak of compassion and forgiveness, but do not acknowledge your own strength or our worthiness. As warriors, the assembly fell silent, once more awaiting Arjuna's response. Sanjaya watched with interest, his eyes fixed on the brothers' exchange. But before Arjuna could respond, Duryodhana, the Panchala prince, spoke out against Bhima's words. What is wrong with what I have done? He asked. I have followed the duties of a Brahmana, but also acted as a Kshatriya. When necessary, Drona, our preceptor, was a master of illusions and superhuman weapons. He used these to harm us. So it was just that he was punished. Duryodhana's words were laced with pride and righteousness. I do not think it wrong for me to have slain him in battle, and as for my son who urges the Kauravas to fight, what is there to fear? You, Arjuna, are a warrior of great prowess, but you seem to be more concerned with virtue than with justice. The assembly erupted into chaos, once more with each side arguing its point of view. Sanjaya watched as the brothers and their allies clashed, their words like swords cutting through the air. But Duryodhana's final words hung in the air, a challenge to Arjuna to take action against those who had wronged them. Fight now, he said. Victory will be yours. In the midst of war-torn Kuru kingdom, Dhritarashtra, the blind king, lamented the humiliation of his teacher Drona. He wondered aloud why no Kshatriya had stood up to defend their revered preceptor against the insults of Drishtadyumna, the prince of Panchalas. The king spoke. Sanjaya, his charioteer and advisor, reported to Arjuna. The Pandava warrior had cast disapproving glances at Drishtadyumna. The others present, including Yudhishthira, Nakula, Sahadeva, Krishna, and Satyaki, stood in silence, their faces filled with shame. Satyaki, however, could not contain his indignation. He rebuked Drishtadyumna for his heinous act of killing his preceptor, calling him a lowest of men who deserved death at the hands of righteous warriors. Satyaki reminded him that his ancestors and descendants would suffer for 7 generations due to his sign. Drishtadyumna, unfazed by Satyaki's words, shot back with a counterattack. He accused Satyaki of being unrighteous and sinful himself, pointing out the hypocrisy in his rebukes. Drishtadyumna brought up Satyaki's own past transgressions, including his role in Purusrava's death. While the latter was in Preya, prince of Panchala continued to taunt Satyaki, saying that he had acted like a Chandala, a low-born person, and that his words were as worthless as those of a perverted soul. Drishtadyumna even went so far as to threaten Satyaki with death if he repeated such harsh words. Satyaki's rage boiled over at this point, and he rushed towards Drishtadyumna, determined to slay him on the spot. But before he could reach his target, Bhima intervened, seizing Satyaki from behind and restraining him as the two warriors struggled, their anger and strength locked in a fierce contest. The battle-scared landscape of Kurukshetra seemed to tremble with the ferocity of their emotions. The fight of the war-torn kingdom hung precariously in the balance, as the mighty Satyaki and Drishtadyumna clashed in a storm of words and fury. Their exchange was a microcosm of the larger conflict that had ravaged the Kuru kingdom for so long, a struggle between right and wrong, good and evil, with no clear victor in sight. As Sandhya watched the scene unfold, he knew that this confrontation would have far-reaching consequences, one that would shape the course of the war to come. The sun beat down upon the battlefield as Aswathaman, Drona's son, unleashed a maelstrom of destruction upon his foes like the destroyer himself at the end of the Yuga. He cut through the enemy lanes with ease, his broad-headed arrows raining down upon them like a storm. The air was filled with the cries of carnivorous creatures and the clash of steel on steel as the warriors clashed. Aswathaman's vow to destroy the Pandava army echoed through the battlefield, striking fear into the hearts of Yudhishthira's troops. But the prince himself stood firm, rallying his men with a mighty roar that dispelled their fears. The two armies collided like titans, their standards and armor glinting in the sunlight as they exchanged blows. The battle raged on, with Aswathaman invoking the Narayana weapon, its fiery arrows blazing through the air like snakes of fire. The Pandava troops were consumed by it, slaughtered like dry grass in a summer conflagration. King Yudhishthira's eyes widened in horror as he beheld his army crumbling before him. In desperation, he turned to Drishtadyumna and Satyaki, urging them to flee with their troops. But Vasudeva, the wise and powerful Kesava, stood firm, forbidding the Pandavas from abandoning their posts. "We must stand our ground," he declared, his voice like thunder in the ears of the warriors. Vamesna, the son of Pandu, rallied to the cause, his mighty mass at the ready. He vowed to oppose Aswathaman's weapon with his own strength, and his words ignited a spark within the hearts of his comrades. The Pandava army stood firm, refusing to yield to the Narayana weaponus. The battle reached its climax. The two armies clashed like mountains, colliding in a titanic struggle. Arjuna, the greatest warrior of them all, grasped his Gandhava, bow ready to face whatever lay ahead. "I will not lay down my arms," he vowed, his eyes blazing with determination. The outcome was far from certain as the two armies faced off against each other, their fates hanging precariously in the balance. But one thing was clear: only one side could emerge victorious, and the very fate of the world hung in the balance. The sun beat down upon the battlefield as the war between the Pandavas and the Kurus raged on. Bhima, the mighty warrior of the Pandava army, was engulfed in a fierce energy emanating from Aswathaman's Narayana weapon. The Varuna weapon wielded by Arjuna seemed to have little effect against the intense force surrounding Bhima, making it impossible for anyone to see that he had been covered. The fiery shafts of Aswathaman shot towards Bhima like a blazing fire, consuming everything in its path. Bhima's chariot, steeds, and driver were shrouded by the energy, making them almost invisible. The warriors of the Pandava army laid down their arms, and even Yudhishthira turned his face away from the Arjuna and Vasudeva, undaunted by the danger, quickly alighted from their chariot and ran towards Bhima. They resorted to the power of illusion, which prevented them from being consumed by the energy. Nara and Narayana then forcibly dragged Bhima and his weapons away, causing him to roar in anger. Vasudeva addressed Bhima, saying, "How is it that you do not abstain from battle despite our prohibition? If we could vanquish the Kurus, now we would continue fighting. Behold, all your warriors have alighted from their chariots." Krishna's words finally calmed Bhima, and he was brought down from his chariot. As soon as Bhima laid aside his arms, the Narayana weapon was pacified, and the unbearable energy dissipated. The battlefield cleared, and sweet breezes began to blow. Animals and birds fell silent, and even the steeds and elephants became cheerful once more. However, Duryodhana urged Aswathaman to use the Narayana weapon again, but it was revealed that it could not be used twice without causing harm to the one wielding it. Defeated, Aswathaman was left with no choice but to face his enemies in battle. Drishtadyumna, the Panchala prince, charged at Aswathaman with great impetuosity, piercing him with arrows and driving away his steeds and driver. Satyaki then joined the fray, cutting off Aswathaman's bow and standard before deeply piercing him in the chest. As the battle raged on, Aswathaman fell into a desperate plight, shrouded by arrows and unsure of what to do next. His father Drona had been slain with the aid of fraud, and now his son was facing an even more formidable enemy. The grandson of Sinai, who would not rest until he had vanquished him, the Curus' hopes began to dwindle as their warriors were defeated one by one despite his rage and determination. Aswathanan, in the midst of the fierce battle, Arjuna beheld a remarkable phenomenon as he rode into the fray on his chariot. As he showered arrows upon the enemy, he saw before him a blazing figure like a being imbued with the radiance of fire. This enigmatic warrior moved ahead of Arjuna's chariot, and wherever he went the enemy forces broke and fled in terror. Arjuna was perplexed by this mysterious apparition and asked the great sage Vesa for an explanation. Vesa revealed to him that the being he had seen was none other than Shankara, the first cause from which all Prajapatis emerged, a puissant deity with boundless energy. Shankara is the embodiment of heaven, earth, and sky, the divine Lord who protects the universe, the great master who grants boons, and the giver of life. Vesa continued to describe the attributes of this supreme deity, known as Mahadeva, the one without a second. He is the destroyer of Daityas, sacrifice, the guardian of all created beings, and the protector of all. His form is beyond human comprehension, with 3 eyes, mighty arms, and matted locks on his head. He wears skins for attire, and his very presence inspires awe. As Vesa spoke, Arjuna's heart was filled with reverence and wonder. He realized that this extraordinary warrior who had walked ahead of him in battle was none other than the divine Mahaswara, the supreme deity himself. This being is beyond human comprehension, capable of waging war without touching the ground nor wielding his lance. Vesa revealed to Arjuna that even the gods in heaven worship and bow down to this supreme deity, who is known by many names: Rudra, Kara, Sen, Samuparamasthen, and Sarva. He is the Lord of all worlds, the protector of the universe, and the embodiment of all sacred waters. As Arjuna listened in rapt attention, Vesa spoke of the various forms that this supreme deity takes: he who wears a leopard skin as his seat, he who has Vishu himself for his arrow, he who is armed with trident, he who wields the sword and shield, and he who is highly auspicious. Arjuna was filled with awe and reverence at the thought of this magnificent being, the Lord of the universe. Finally, Vesa instructed Arjuna to seek the protection of this supreme deity, the granter of boons, the god attired in deer-skins. Salutations were offered to this divine Lord, who has Vaisravana as his friend and is revered by all righteous persons.